We begin in Syria, where after years of war, the battle for Aleppo has for now come to a stop. A ceasefire is in place. Rebel fighters have agreed to leave, and Russia says military operations have come to an end. The agreement allows civilians and all rebel fighters to evacuate and follows reports of human rights violations by Syrian forces. The deal is temporary and will expire on Wednesday night. It was brokered by Russia, which, of course, supports the regime, and Turkey, which backs the opposition. It came after an onslaught described by the UN as a complete meltdown of humanity. Well, in a moment, we'll be talking to TRT World's Andrew Hopkins, who is live for us in Ankara. But first, let's get the very latest on the evacuation of East Aleppo and speak to Adis Tianshan, who is in Gaziantep on the border between Turkey and Syria. So, Adis, let's start with you. Bring us up to date with the evacuations. How's it begun?
Well, Malene, so far as we know, nobody has been evacuated out of eastern Aleppo, neither the rebels nor the civilians. But I could at least tell you that the right tone is being set for it, in that the cessation of hostilities came into effect as of Tuesday late evening, and for now we're still seeing a rare scene in Aleppo, a relative quiet and calm compared to the last months and even years at end. But this is not to say that everything is going perfectly well. We've heard that there was an initial convoy yesterday. There was an initial batch of civilians that wanted to be evacuated. There were at least 5 buses taking them out of the city, but they were stopped on their way and returned back to eastern Aleppo. We understand there was some miscommunication about the exact starting time of the evacuation and the route that civilians and rebels would be taken on their way to the western countryside and from there on to the northern Idlib province. As I've said, nobody has been evacuated, but we're hearing that 33 buses are parked just outside the city in Aleppo on the main road where they will start their evacuation. And we're also hearing that just around the morning hours, the first hours of the Wednesday morning, it is due to start, we are told. So there's certainly hope that it will take place sometime soon, especially the fact that there's still a cessation of hostilities in effect is a positive change. And as you rightly pointed it out, it's only going to take 24 hours to take several thousands of rebels, but the number of civilians is a lot more. Remember, close to 100,000 people have been stuck there with very little food, water, no electricity and medical supplies. So they absolutely need this evacuation as soon as possible. And it is going to be a daunting task to make it all happen just in 24 hours.
Adis, what is the bigger picture here? I mean, what does it mean for the overall Syrian revolution?
Well, many people are asking if this has meant a surrender for the rebel groups. I think it really depends how you look at it, particularly in the case of Aleppo, which is the largest city in Syria, one of the most strategic towns that gives you a leverage. Whoever controls Aleppo will have a huge sway over this civil war as we know it. And the fact that the rebels have moved out of Aleppo is now a major blow that they have to deal with. But regardless of that, they are saying that they haven't surrendered and they would not surrender. So in a way, yes, they have given up hope on Aleppo because they were already stuck in such a small enclave. They were completely surrounded by regime forces, allied militia, and they were being pounded by Russian airstrikes constantly. They had given up hope in Aleppo, but from where they will be taken to outside in the countryside of Aleppo as well as Idlib province, we understand that the revolution will continue and they will continue to fight and confront these groups, the regime forces as well as their allied militia.
Okay, Adis, good to speak to you. Adis Tianshan there for us in Gaziantep. Let's get the reaction from Ankara and speak to Andrew Hopkins. Andrew, extraordinary turnaround in the last 24 hours. How did this deal come about?
Marlene, it seems to have come about through regular talks held between Russia and Turkey. You may remember that just over a year ago, the two sides fell out in quite a big way, really, when Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet over the Syrian border. Now, a few months ago, they managed to patch up their differences to a certain extent, and they've been holding regular meetings to talk about issues such as the economy in Syria, and it seems like it's all come about because of these particular meetings. And it's interesting that these two sides seem to be behind this particular deal because they both in their own ways have access to the two main sides on the battlefields in Syria, because we know that Russia's a major ally of the Syrian regime, and also Turkey is a major backer of the Free Syrian Army, which operates inside Aleppo. It also has some influence on some other groups there too, such as Ahrar al-Sham. And yesterday we know that the Turkish foreign minister had a phone conversation with his Russian counterpart, so there was some indication that maybe something was in the offing late last night.
And Turkey is playing, or is going to play, a huge part in terms of the humanitarian rescue of many of the people from this part of Syria. Talk us through exactly what role they're going to play.
Yeah, Turkey's been quite vocal in the past few days about making sure that aid gets through to these people that have been trapped in Aleppo. There's no word at the moment really on any major international effort, but there are some individual activities going on inside Turkey itself. Late last night, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mehmet Şimşek, he tweeted that the government is preparing a tent city for 80,000 people. There's no details yet as to where that will be or how it will operate or be put together, and hopefully we can get that later today. But also the Turkish Red Crescent says it's going to prepare to help 55,000 people. The IHH, another Turkish group we know, is putting together a convoy to help them. Also on an international scale, the International Committee for the Red Cross says it's willing to help out very quickly if some kind of deal on some basic principles can be put together. But so it seems that there's some things going on an individual basis, but nothing really imminent on an international scale.
What have we heard from the international community? Because we have had various meetings taking place in Geneva, in France, elsewhere, trying to bring about some sort of resolution. But it seems in the end it came down to Russia and Turkey. Has there been any response to this deal internationally?
There's been no response so far. I think they will generally welcome anything like this where an end to the fight can be brought about, even if it's just in one part of Syria. And there has been a lot of calls on the international arena, if you like, for aid to get through to these people. But I think, as Adiz has just referred to a short while ago, there do seem to be some problems going on here, and I think many people are waiting to see whether this deal actually does work, whether these people are allowed to leave this area and go to an area of relative safety, because many times in the past here in Syria there have been lots of deals mooted, lots of ceasefires, and they've never held. So I think we really have to wait and see.
It's interesting, as you say that, Andrew. I'm just looking at a flash that has come through from the Reuters newswire saying that the Syrian Observatory is saying that the start of the Aleppo evacuation has been delayed, but it's not yet clear why. So that is coming from the Syrian Observatory saying the start of the Aleppo evacuation has been delayed. As we get any more developments on this, we will, of course, bring it to you. Meanwhile, there have been several reports suggesting that dozens of civilians were killed before the deal was struck. Shmeem Chowdhury has more on this.
This was the scene in eastern Aleppo just hours before a ceasefire was declared. Thousands of people trying to escape as regime forces closed in on the few remaining rebel-held areas.
Look at why we are coming. Look at his body. Why are we coming? It's because we wanted to get rid of them. And look how they killed my child. Why my brother? Why?
The regime had recaptured around 98% of eastern Aleppo after days of intense bombardment and ground fighting. Civilians trapped inside the remaining few square kilometers of rebel-held territory feared for their lives.
To everyone who can hear me, we are here exposed to a genocide in the besieged city of Aleppo. This may be my last video. More than 50,000 of civilians who rebelled against the dictator al-Assad are threatened with field executions or dying under bombing.
Now, under a new ceasefire deal, they have a route out. Over the past few days, there have been reports of abuses by pro-government forces, including the killings of men, women and children in their homes. The regime and Russia say they've been targeting terrorists, but the UN has described the scenes in eastern Aleppo as a complete meltdown of humanity. And questions remain whether all the rebels will leave. Before the ceasefire, there was defiance.
Whatever the regime in Russia does to try and convince us to surrender ourselves, we will not. We will surrender ourselves to God, and we will pull ourselves up from our hearts and our feet, and we will remain firm in our positions until we meet God.
Most of the recaptured areas are now a wasteland of flattened buildings and bullet-ridden walls. The people who lived here have fled to western Aleppo and the countryside. The regime's recapture of eastern Aleppo leaves the rebels without a significant presence in any of Syria's main cities. But they still hold much of the territory west of Aleppo and in the province of Idlib. The ceasefire will be welcomed by those remaining inside eastern Aleppo. Tens of thousands of lives are at stake. Shamim Chowdhury, TRT World.